Good morning, third grade. Our targets for today are: I can use an area model to represent multiplication facts, and I can identify the product of all benchmark facts. A benchmark fact is a fact that you know automatically. All of the 10s, 5s, 2s, 3s, and 4s facts that we have learned will be benchmark facts for us. We will practice these today and also over winter break to make sure that we know all of these facts in a snap. Here are some benchmark facts that we're going to practice right now. As you can see, these are all 10s facts. We're going to practice the first few together, and then you will complete the rest on your own. 10 times 10. I know that 10 times 10 means there are 10 squares in each row and 10 rows. It's 10 tenths. 10 times 10 equals 100. 10 times 1. I know that 10 times 1 means that there's 10 in each row and 1 row. 10 times 1 is 10. 10 times 9. 10 times 9 means there are 10 squares in each row and 9 rows. I know that 10 times 9 is 90. 10 times 0. 10 times 0, there are 10 squares in each row, but there are 0 rows. Oh yes, 10 times 0 is 0. You're going to solve the rest of these independently. Here we go. 10 times 4. Yes, 10 times 4 is 40. 10 times 7. Yes, 10 times 7 is 70. 10 times 6. Oh yes, 10 times 6 is 60. 10 times 5. Of course, 10 times 5 is 50. What about 10 times 8? Oh yes, 10 times 8 equals 80. 10 times 3. Oh yes, 10 times 3 equals 30. And finally, 10 times 2. Yes, 10 times 2 equals 20. Great job practicing these benchmark facts with me today. We're going to practice our other benchmark facts, 2s, 5s, 4s, and 3s, today as well. But first, let's review what we already know about multiplication. Well, first of all, we know that area is the amount of space covered by an object, and that area is measured in square units, which is a measurement whose sides have exactly the same length. This is an example of a square unit here. It's 1 unit long and 1 unit wide. It's 1 square unit, and we could use it to find how much space something covers. You can see that this rectangle is covering a certain amount of space. Let's count the square units to determine how much space this rectangle is covering, or what the area of the rectangle is. Ready? Here we go. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. This rectangle covers 16 squares, so the area of this rectangle is 16 square units. We've also learned the words horizontal and vertical. Horizontal means flat, level, or running side to side. This line here is a horizontal line. This line here is a horizontal line because it runs side to side. Vertical is the opposite of horizontal. It means up and down or in the upright position. This line is a vertical line because it goes up and down. We've also learned about side lengths. They're the lengths of each side of a rectangle. Rectangles have 2 horizontal side lengths that run side to side, the bottom and top. These two sides are the same length, and they tell the number of squares per row. Rectangles also have vertical side lengths that go up and down. The left side and right side of the rectangle are the vertical side lengths, and they are the same length as each other. They tell the number of rows in the rectangle. We've learned that factor is what you call a number that you are multiplying. The factors are the side lengths on a rectangle. One factor is the number of squares in each row, and the one factor is the number of rows. So when we look at this 8 by 2 rectangle, we see that there are 8 squares in each row. So one factor is 8. And there are 2 rows, so one factor is 2. This multiplication equation would be 8 times 2. 8 squares in each row times 2 rows. So 8 is a factor and 2 is a factor because they are the numbers we're multiplying. You'll also remember that the answer to a multiplication problem is called a product. A product is the area of a rectangle. The product is the total number of square units that a rectangle covers. This 8 by 2 rectangle covers 16 squares. So the product in the equation 8 times 2 is 16 because 16 is the answer to 8 times 2. It's the product. We've also learned about the commutative property of multiplication. You know that the commutative property tells us that we can change the order of the factors that we're multiplying without changing the product. So look at this 8 by 2 rectangle. It's the same 8 by 2 rectangle we've been looking at today. We know that our factors are 8 and 2, and we know that the area is 16. So 8 times 2 equals 16. Well, if I changed the order of the factors from 8 times 2 to 2 times 8, meaning that I took the exact same rectangle and turned it on its side, so there were 2 squares in each row and 8 rows, the area would still be 16. My product would still be 16. So it does not matter the order of the factors, 8 times 2 or 2 times 8. The product, the answer, is the same. It's 16 either way. 8 times 2 equals 16 and 2 times 8 equals 16. So let's put it all together. What do we know? We know that this rectangle is measured in square units. This is 1 square unit here. We know that the horizontal side length is 8 because there are 8 squares in each row. And the vertical side length is 2 because there are 2 rows. We know that this is an 8 by 2 rectangle and that the area of the rectangle is 16 square units. So, therefore, we know 8 times 2 equals 16 and also 2 times 8 equals 16. Today, 3rd grade, we're going to look at a few benchmark facts together. I'm going to take some rectangles and put them on some grids, and we're going to determine what multiplication fact each rectangle represents. Here is our first rectangle. Look at this rectangle. How many squares are in each horizontal row? Well, there are 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 squares in each horizontal row. And how many rows are there? Well, we can clearly see there are 1, 2, 3 horizontal squares, 3 rows in each rectangle. So the size of this rectangle is 5 by 3. Let's find the area of this rectangle. We could count every single square, but since I see that these are rows of 5, I'll go ahead and just count by 5 because each row has 5 squares in it. There are 1, 2, 3 rows of 5, so I'm going to count by 5 3 times. Ready? Count by 5s with me. 5, 10, 15. The total area in this rectangle is 15 squares. So I now know 5 times 3 equals 15. I also then know that 3 times 5 equals 15. Let's take a look at another rectangle. Here's our next rectangle. Let's go ahead and look at this rectangle and see how many squares are in each row. Well, there are 1, 2 squares in each row. And how many rows are there? 1, 2, 3. There are 3 squares in each row. So the size of this rectangle is a 2 by 3. Let's go ahead and find the area of this rectangle. I could count every single square, but I noticed that these are in groups of 2, and I know how to count by 2s. So I'm going to go ahead and count by 2s to find the area. There are 1, 2, 3 groups of 2, so I'm going to count by 2 3 times. Ready? Here we go. 2, 4, 6. The area of this rectangle is 6 square units. So I now know 2 times 3 equals 6, and 3 times 2 equals 6. Great. let's go ahead and look at another rectangle together. Here's our next rectangle. Let's look at this rectangle and see how many squares are in each row. Well, there are clearly 1, 2, 3 squares in each row. And how many rows are there? 1, 2, 3. There are 3 rows. So this rectangle is a 3 by 3 rectangle. Go ahead and find the area of this rectangle by counting all of the squares. What is the area of this rectangle? You're right, the area of this rectangle is 9 squares. So, I now know that 3 times 3 equals 9. Let's look at one more rectangle together. Here's our last rectangle. Let's see how many squares are in each row. 1, 2, 3. There are 3 squares in each row. And how many rows are there? 1, 2, 3, 4. There are 4 squares in each row. So this is a 3 by 4 rectangle. What is the area of this rectangle? You're right. The area of this rectangle is 12 squares. So we now know 3 times 4 equals 12. What other fact do we also now know? You're right. The commutative property of multiplication tells us we can switch the order of the factors without changing the product. So we also know 4 times 3 equals 12. Great job, 3rd grade. Let's go ahead and look at just a couple of multiplication problems together. These could be any of our benchmark facts. Look at this multiplication. Look at this area model. Which multiplication fact matches this area model? You're so right. This is a 4 by 4 rectangle. What is the product of 4 times 4? Yes, the product of 4 times 4 is 16. Here's a new rectangle. Which area model matches this which multiplication fact matches this area model? You're right. This is a 4 by 2 rectangle because there are 4 squares in each row and 2 rows. What is the product of 4 times 2? Yes, 4 times 2 equals 8. Look at this next rectangle. Which multiplication fact matches this area model? You're right. This is a 5 by 4. This is a 5 by 4 rectangle. So, what is the product of 5 times 4? I agree. 5 times 4 equals 20. Take a look at this area model. Which multiplication fact matches this area model? You're right. This is a 3 by 4 rectangle. So, what is the product of 3 times 4? You're right. 3 times 4 equals 12. The product is 12. Here's one last area model. Which multiplication fact matches this area model? You're right. This is a 5 by 0. There are 5 squares in each row, but there are 0 rows, so there really isn't a rectangle. What is the product of 5 times 0? Yes, 5 times 0 is 0. There isn't a rectangle, no space is covered, so the area of a 5 by 0 rectangle is 0. 5 times 0 is 0. Thank you for practicing these multiplication benchmark facts with me over the last few days, 3rd grade. Make sure to practice all of these benchmark facts, 10s, 5s, 2s, 3s, and 4s over winter break. Have an excellent winter break, 3rd grade.